Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Friday, and it's not just any Friday. It is First Nation Friday. Welcome to Stir Crazy, episode number 93. I'm your host, Kim Brown, and of course, if you've been watching this show for the several months that we have been on during the COVID pandemic lockdown, then you know what we do every other Friday. It is First Nation Fridays. That is where we talk about issues pertaining to Indian country and issues affecting our Indigenous brothers and sisters. Not only here in the U.S., but today we are going to discuss a couple of stories that are coming out of Canada, one out of Quebec, specifically out of Montreal, where an Indigenous woman was in the hospital receiving care, dying actually, and she had the presence of mind to begin recording because she was being mistreated by medical staff. This is a big story happening in Montreal. The woman sadly passed away, but she was being insulted by the staff, calling her stupid, insinuating that she was on the so-called government dole, basically experiencing medical racism. And that is a big issue that a lot of Indigenous people face when seeking medical treatment, really of any kind. We're going to get into that. We're also going to talk about the Orange Shirt Day that they recently celebrated in Canada, remembering the survivors the Indian boarding schools, a huge cultural genocidal tactic enacted not only by Canada, but by the U.S. government as well, to separate Native children, not only from their families, but from their languages and their culture. We'll discuss the importance of that. But now I'd like to bring in our fantastic panel. I love this crew of enlightened persons that we have on here every other Friday. Of course, you know her. She is the founder of Crushing Colonialism. She's a journalist and activist, Jen Deerin-Water. Also a journalist and activist joining us today, Desiree Kane, and another writer, journalist, activist coming to us from Los Angeles, Johnny J. Family, great to see you all. I love to see your glowing, smiling faces. It's wonderful to see you again here on First Nation Friday.
It's great to be here. Yeah, sorry I had to miss our last episode, but it was wonderful. I really enjoyed watching it.
Good. I'm glad. It was a great conversation, and we did miss you guys. We missed you, Jen and Desiree. We had a wonderful time, but you guys are hard to replace. Let me put it that way. You guys, but before we get started on the slate of topics that we have in front of us today, we're going to get into some other issues affecting Indian country as well. We got to start off with the news of the day.
The president and the first lady tested positive for COVID-19. They remain in good spirits. The president does have mild symptoms, and as we look to try to make sure that not only his health and safety and welfare is good, we continue to look at that for all of the American people. He continues to be not only in good spirits, but very energetic. We've talked a number of times this morning. I got the 5 or 6 things that he had tasked me to do, like I do every single morning, and he is certainly wanting to make sure that we stay engaged.
Describe his symptoms, and is he taking hydroxychloroquine?
Well, I'm not going to get into any particular treatment that he may or may not have. He has mild symptoms. As we look at that, the doctor will continue to provide expertise in the residence. He's in the residence now, and in true fashion, he's probably critiquing the way that I'm answering these questions. And I can tell you that a number of us will be reporting back to him on the task at hand.
Okay, that video edit courtesy of the Washington Post. First Nation Friday crew. Of course, that was White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows addressing reporters today. I'm sure everyone's phone started going off in the middle of the night. I happened to wake up this morning at 6 o'clock because I cut on the local news just out of habit, and Savannah Guthrie from NBC broke in at 6:10 to say that Trump announced that he and Melania have got the COVID. Now, this, of course, coming after the president has long downplayed the seriousness of the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, refusing to wear masks, refusing to call on people to wear a mask, a delayed response and an effective response, as we have 207,000 people in this country alone dead with over 7 million infections. Of course, Indian country being hit particularly hard, Black America being hit particularly hard, Latin America, in this America, the United States, Latinx people being hit very hard by this pandemic. And here we are with the president himself and his wife coming down with it. Gang, let's start with your reaction, if you have a reaction. And I know it's a little tempting to do a little dance for this news, but how do we wrestle with that? Someone who is so abhorrent, if you consider yourself to be a quote unquote good person, of course you don't want to wish death or suffering on another person. But does Donald Trump really count as a person? Jen Derenwater, let me get your take here.
I have so much to say. I'm like a little kid on Christmas morning. I can barely hold still. I want to start this by saying that, of course, I think this is awful, if for no other reason than the egregious and irresponsible behavior of Trump puts everyone's lives at risk, and not just here in the so-called US, but really across the world. But when I heard the news, so before I went to bed last night, I saw that his aide had tested positive, and then I woke up to find out he had it as well. And the first thing that went through my mind was the song from the musical Chicago, He Had It Coming. And that's just been kind of running on a little loop in my head all day. Like, I wish I could be that person that's like, no, we got to love our fellow man, but I don't see why I'm supposed to love, this horrible human being that's really responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths. And I don't see any reason to celebrate his life and mourn him, especially when he's going to get treatment and care that the rest of us will never get. And meanwhile, look at how he's behaved, I mean, this week alone, I have no love for Biden or the Democrats, but he mocked Biden for wearing masks and social distancing. Like, come on, man, Trump had it coming.
Desiree, of course, I do want to ask, does Trump count as a person? Does Trump count as people? Should we, feel, of course we feel bad for people with COVID. Is Trump a people is up for debate. But also what's up for debate is the fact that this president has lied so much, right? Lying is part of his being, his modus operandi. Every time he opens his mouth, he's telling a lie. Is there a chance that Trump is lying about this in order to perhaps use it to gain some sort of sympathetic advantage politically, given that we're so close to election day, or if he lies that he has COVID and claims to make a quick recovery, does that bolster his claim that COVID was not a big deal? Do you think Trump actually has the COVID?
I think that we should always be on guard when it comes to anything that comes out of that trash heap's mouth. He's terrible. The reality is that rich people that can afford access to proper medical care are not the folks who are dying of COVID. So I think, I don't know, but the theorist in me says we need to be watching Trump for a coup. I think that he is unlikely to leave office without it being a difficult and strenuous situation. And so I think it's really, I just think we need to be mindful that the election is not that far away. And if he's going to be quarantined for 2 weeks of that, there's just a lot of things. There's a lot of ways that this could play out. I think I don't know if I believe him or not. I don't believe really anything he says. I just don't know.
Yeah. Johnny J, there's so many people, including, some of us here on this call, some of us that we know by extension who have underlying medical conditions who are predisposed to possibly contracting COVID. And Trump, despite his wealth and his privilege, he does fall into that category given his age. He's in his 70s, and they keep making reference to his weight. I don't know how much weight is a factor in people getting COVID, but that's something that the news has been referencing. And yet he has flouted so many of the protections, including mask wearing and having these rallies with thousands of his supporters who are also not wearing masks. He has not behaved like a person who could be predisposed to COVID, and voila, now he has it. How much of his privilege do you think went into the fact that he has contracted this disease, and the fact that it took him really so long to get it? Because we've been looking at Trump, how he's been behaving and not necessarily acting like there's a global pandemic. And it's like, damn, how come the COVID hasn't jumped on Trump yet? But yet here it finally has.
Well, honestly, I think the only risk that he has been taking is in public. I think behind the scenes where we're not looking, he's doing everything he can to protect himself because he knows this is a real threat. And I think part of the reason that he has downplayed it is because he's been looking to profit from this from the very beginning, from touting medical, cures, medications that have been taken from other people that have proven medical needs for these medications. Like, they have not been able to get their medication. And I'm one of those people. As somebody who does have diabetes, I have a lupus. Plaquenil is one of the biggest drugs that is used to treat lupus. And for a lot of patients with lupus, at the very beginning of this, once they started touting Plaquenil or hydrochloroquine as a cure for COVID or as being effective treatment, a lot of people were unable to get their prescriptions refilled. And that left a lot of people in a very precarious medical situation, because that means you also have to switch your medication. And when you switch medications and you have a chronic illness like lupus, it's not that easy. You have to just your body, you don't know how your body's going to respond or if it's going to be an effective treatment for you. For me, Plaquenil does not work for my lupus. I just went on Plaquenil not too long ago, and it was something that didn't adhere to my body. My lupus tends to attack my kidneys and my liver. So any kind of harsh medications, we have to watch my case very carefully to see if my body is going to react or if it can handle it. Plaquenil is one of the drugs that I can't use, but many lupus patients can. And as far as diabetes, I was also on saxagliptin. And I was surprised when I went to refill my prescription and they told me that they were only be able to give out one prescription a month. And if you weren't the first person to put in your order for a refill, then you weren't getting your medication. And, I don't know how many pharmacies I called, but it was the same story everywhere. They just did not have a supply of saxagliptin. And I had to call my doctor, who put me on another medication that's in the same family, aligliptin. And it's easier to access, but it's also the same thing. There have been pharmacies where they don't have that in stock because a lot of medical research facilities are using this to test to see how effective it's going to be on COVID-19. So, there's a lot of people like me that have chronic illnesses who are already disposed to the more severe symptoms of COVID if we were to contract it, that, have been suffering without the medications that we need since the beginning of this pandemic. And it makes me so angry because I know that Trump's privilege means that he is going to always have access to the medications that he needs. Like right now, he's probably got the best doctors. He's got the best care. Meanwhile, the rest of us are getting scraps. And it makes me really angry to know that he has COVID just because, one, I think he's lying. And I think that he's using this as a way to kind of downplay the seriousness and to downplay the impact. And I think in a couple of days, he's going to be on TV bragging about his miraculous recovery and how it wasn't that bad. So everyone has nothing to worry about. That's the way that I think. At the same time, if he has COVID and he survives, again, that is going to make me so angry because I lost my uncle who was a good man, who did a lot to help his tribe, who had a family. And it would just be the most terrible thing that happen if Trump survives. And, so many good Americans like my uncle don't. And it just, I don't know, the whole thing just makes me so angry right now because, I already know that either way that this goes, Trump is going to be made into a martyr. And if he does recover, it is just going to make his fan base even more rabid in their denial of the seriousness of COVID-19, which is going to put everybody at risk again. So, it's just really disgusting to me right now. Like, I don't even know how to feel anything but anger. Like, I don't want to wish him bad. But at the same time, it's almost like karma. Like, please do your thing right now,
Mm-hmm.
I know. And, looking at around the world at some of the world leaders that COVID has affected, including the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, both of whom made recoveries from COVID. And they kind of suck. So COVID's not necessarily taking out who we would prefer it to take out. Guys, I want to read a couple comments. Owen Oni from the comment says, I want to see him incarcerated. He unfortunately still needs to be alive for that to happen. Socrates Agrio says, why should we believe Trump? I don't think we should believe Trump. And I'm not really sure because he's such a stunts person, you know what I mean? Like he's a master distractor. He knows that he came off really bad during that first presidential debate with Joe Biden. And at least according to some of the national polls, the numbers were reflecting that. So I think that this is, a trick, a bit of deception on his part in order to garner some sort of sympathy vote. I'm not really sure what this is, but I guess we will find out soon enough in the next couple of weeks. And it's just all these things are just coming a little bit too close together. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Yep. I mean, that's exactly what I thought when this came out. Like last night I saw it and I was just like, good Lord, I knew he was going to be up to something. He had to find something to distract from the debates because that was amazing, amazingly bad. But it was everything that I thought the debates would be given the candidates. It was like watching grumpy old men, but with a little fascism and white supremacy thrown in. Like that's seriously what I was watching. I was watching it and just laughing. And it was like, wow, like this is how low the bar has been set, that we have two men who are running for the highest office in our country that can't behave themselves, that can't be civil and follow the rules that they have agreed to follow. And they're just both bickering, talking over each other, and neither one of them said anything. Neither one of them has a plan for how to move this nation forward. So to me, it was just comedy. It was the best stand-up. And for somebody who loves to go to the Comedy Store here in LA and, loves comedy and have had to suffer now that everything's been shut down, that was the next best thing, because it was just bicker. It was just the most hilarious thing. But come on, guys, when Biden said, will you shut up, man? That was so freaking iconic. And I could not quit laughing. I mean, thank goodness for the debates for COVID entertainment.
There was one point, so I only watched about the first hour of the debate. And there was one point where the moderator was telling Trump, like, you need to stop interrupting. And his immediate response was, well, he's been interrupting too. And I was like, you were absolutely that bratty kid on the playground, snitching out all your schoolmates. It was like grumpy old men. It'd be hilarious if it weren't real,
Listen, the debate was funny.
For me, honestly, go ahead.
No, go ahead, sweetie.
Oh, I just watched it and it felt very much like, I don't know, it was triggering because people who are abusive do stuff like that, narcissists who have to control everything. They act like Trump, and they do this thing called Darvo, which is basically you diminish and then you attack and then you reverse the role from oppressor to victim. And so it's very, you can kind of see the template of abuse that Trump is working with, and it is called DARVO. So diminish, attack, and then reverse to victim. So that's exactly what happened. We had the debates, and now this would be his reversing the role, where he looked like a dingleberry, and now he has to be the victim. It is an established pattern of abuse. So I watched it and I was just like, oh dear. I really appreciated seeing memes and things of where people put they put a towel to cover one half of the TV so they could just see Biden. If I could have done that at that moment, I would have done that.
That's a good idea. I didn't even think to do something like that. That's pretty clever.
I mean, not to get off topic, but let's not act like Biden is so great just because we all hate Trump so much. Like, Biden is still a flaming bag of dog feces. Like, the man is garbage, outside of just the entertainment value of the debate. When they were talking about Roe v. Wade and racism and whatnot, I'm like, so we've got 3 old white men here. We got our moderator and we've got our 2 presidential candidates, all wealthy, all powerful, all straight, all cis, at one point in time, all healthy and able-bodied. What the fuck do I care what they think about my right to my reproductive justice? What do I care as a native what they think about racism? They're all a bunch of just misogynistic, racist assholes. I mean, there was at one point, it was towards the beginning of the debate, Biden said, "I am the Democratic Party." And,
God.
I mean, one, the arrogance, like, my God. But also, yeah, you kind of are the Democratic Party. And you're why I went from seeing somebody that was, proud Democrat working for nothing for those people to being like, wow, you all are trash. Like, you're just trash. And I'm like, you're right, Biden, you are the Democratic Party. You are a party that is dying. You are a party that doesn't represent the people. Like, fuck Trump, but let's not give Biden a free pass along the way either.
Well, yeah, Fast sold out the Green New Deal like in a snap. So he's, I have many feelings.
Understandably. And listen, we are not going to spend any more of our wonderful hour on those dickheads. Let us surrender them right now and move on to issues impacting the Indigenous community. And I want us to start a little north of the border in Canada, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, y'all, but it seems as though there are many shared experiences of Indigenous communities between the United States and Canada, the same policies of removal, the same policies of genocide, similar policies of, the Indian schools, the boarding schools. Both Canada and the U.S. took to all these practices and policies very giddily. But September 30th in Canada is what they call Orange Shirt Day, and it is a remembrance day for the victims of the Indian boarding schools. And I put up this tweet from the RMCP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because I thought it was kind of ironic for the police to be, tweeting their support and their solidarity with the Indigenous and First Nations community in Canada, but performative, solidarity is uniform, I guess, across the continent. But Dwayne, I want us to play that video, if we could, from a woman named Wendy, detailing her experience and why Orange Shirt Day is of tremendous importance to the First Nations community in Canada.
Hello everyone, my name is Phyllis Webstad. I am Shawetmch from the Strachamch, Kenno Creek, Chatlam, Dog Creek First Nation, which is about 1.5 hours southwest from Williams Lake, BC. I grew up with my granny on the Dog Creek Reserve until I was 10, then moved with my auntie after she finished university. When I had just turned 6, I was sent to the St. Joseph Indian Residential School near Williams Lake, a place we called the Mission. My granny bought me a shiny new orange shirt to go to school in. When I got there, I was stripped, my clothing taken away, including my new orange shirt, and I never saw it again. I was no longer excited to be going to school. I wanted to go home to Granny. I had to stay there for 300 sleeps. No matter how much all of us little kids cried, it didn't matter. No one listened to us. Our feelings didn't matter. We didn't matter. I am the third generation that attended residential school. Both my grandmother and mother attended the mission for 10 years each. Today is a day to honor and remember residential school survivors and their families. Every child matters, even if you're an adult. We must also remember those children that never made it and are no longer with us. Today is a day for survivors to tell their stories and for us to listen with open hearts. I am humbled and honored that you are all taking part in Orange Shirt Day. When I was in school, I didn't know my own history, so I am overjoyed that you are taking part and learning the true history of Canada's First Peoples. Guksjem, thank you.
Panel, I'm curious, as Indigenous peoples in the United States, at least, how common were these experiences in your family heritage, or were they common at all? I don't know how ubiquitous a thing where Native people or Native children specifically were sent to these boarding schools. Was this extremely widespread that each of you has perhaps a family attachment to it or a family story to it? Jen, let me start with you, and you tell us if you have a relationship with what so many Native people experienced with the boarding schools.
It's very common. It's very widespread. A lot of us have at least one family member that could speak to it. For me, the Cherokee comes on my father's side. My mom is white, but my father is also mixed. He's also white. And the people in my father's family died quite young. A lot of them die in their 50s. My grandpa Deerenwater died before I was born. So there are a lot of family stories and experiences that I just don't know. And my father, for a variety of reasons, historical and intergenerational trauma, a trauma from being a Vietnam vet, and just maybe not being the best human being. He was pretty emotionally, mentally abusive to me as a child. So there's just a lot of stories and things that I don't have. So I can't say personally if my family experienced that, but my father did tell me enough stuff about how my great-grandpa Deerenwater was ashamed to be Native and that he wouldn't speak the language to his kids. And there was just a lot that he wouldn't pass down. So I suspect that could be part of my family story, but it's something that I'm trying to learn as I go. But I know so many people that they themselves or their family members have been in boarding schools. It's pretty widespread across Indigenous communities.
Johnny J, can you share with us, if you could, if you know of any familial experiences or experiences that have been communicated to you about the horrors of the residential boarding schools?
Actually, yes. My grandpa, when he was a child, when his dad passed away, because his mom was now single and there were 8 kids, they removed all the children from the home because in their eyes, she was no longer able to care for them as a single mother. So they took him and his siblings and they split them up. The girls were sent to the Wheelock Academy in Oklahoma, which was an infamous residential boarding school for young Native girls. My grandpa was sent to an orphanage, and some of his brothers were also sent to different residential boarding schools, but they were separated. Some of them had their names changed to more American names. They suffered horrific abuse, and they spent the rest of their lives trying to find each other. The first siblings that were able to reconnect was my grandpa and his sister Elsie. And from there, all throughout my life, we were finding different siblings we'd have like these family reunions, and it'd be like, oh, we found so-and-so, so we're going to get the family together and bring them back in. And that's how I grew up, was just finding all these different grandpas and grandmas that I didn't know I had, and not really knowing the history because my grandpa never really talked about it. So we actually didn't know. We knew that he was sent to residential boarding school, but we didn't know the extent of the abuse that they suffered until after he passed away. And it was actually at his funeral that they found their last sibling, their youngest sibling. He just happened to read my grandpa's obituary in a paper and was like, that's my brother. And he showed up to the funeral. So, you know, that it was kind of like a bittersweet moment because, you know, the family was all together for that last moment to say goodbye to my grandpa. But, you know, so when you talk about the residential boarding schools, a lot of people think, oh, well, that's in the past. It's so far away. But that was my grandpa. And, you know, the abuse that they suffered was just so horrific. And it wasn't until after he died, you know, that we started learning more about my grandpa. And he was a fluent Choctaw speaker. And it's kind of funny, like we found a Bible that was in Choctaw. We found hymnal books that were in Choctaw. And, you know, it kind of started me down this road of learning more about my family and like what he came from. And, you know, just knowing that, you know, he had all this knowledge that he was just scared to pass on because he didn't want his children to face the same discriminations or to feel like they were less than the way that he was made to feel in these residential boarding schools that strip you of your identity, from your names, from your culture, from your communities, from your languages. They stripped everything away from the native children that they were taking, and they made them hate themselves. They instilled that hate and shame of being native in them. And it's important to also know that, you know, the residential boarding schools, you know, they still exist today. There are still operating residential boarding schools for Native children. And, you know, they're not all bad, but they all do have that history attached to them for the most part. And it's important to know that because that's what Indigenous people are still facing. The genocidal policies of the past are still happening today, just in different ways. It gets recycled over and over and over again. With every generation, you could go and you can find policies of removal, of genocide, of extermination, of, you know, even assimilation, and trying to integrate us into American society. We're still seeing those policies, and we still feel the impact of them to this day. And it's horrific when you hear these stories. Because, you know, it wasn't just my grandpa, it was my other grandpas and his sisters. And you hear their stories and you're thinking, oh, wow, like the strength and fortitude that they had to survive that and to come out still trying to find each other and to learn how to exist as a Native person in a world that made them ashamed of it. Like the strength of that. Because, you know, I grew up in a really huge family, and you never would have guessed that my grandpa had experienced such abuse. He was always a loving grandpa, and there were a lot of things that I understand now that were survival tactics for him, coping mechanisms, because, you know, I've seen how that impacts our whole family in the way that we deal with the trauma that we face. Because when you go to these residential boarding schools, when you've been taken from your family, you've had that connection severed, it changes the way that you're able to relate to other people, the way that you're able to connect with other people. It changes that. Even the way that you just feel like you can't talk about what you've gone through. And there's such a stigma in Indian country when it comes to experiencing trauma. A lot of our older generations were told not to talk about it, to pretend that it never happened. And when you let that build up, well, there you go. You start seeing how people start trying to self-medicate through alcohol, through drug abuse. We have high rates of suicide. And all of this is a symptom of the colonization that we've dealt with. It's a coping mechanism for a lot of people. And I think that's so important to understand because our communities have been just devastated by these policies. And it's not something that's just 100, 200 years in the past. Like, this is literally within the last 75, 50 years that, we've had natives who have been experiencing these horrific residential boarding schools where they've gone in, and very few were lucky enough to leave. There are mass graves that they're finding now when they go in to study these residential boarding schools. Just about 5 years ago, they found a mass grave that they knew was there, but they weren't able to locate. But they finally found it, and they were able to start sending the bodies of the children that were buried there, finding what tribes they came from and sending them home. And that's still an ongoing project of them trying to find out where these children belong so that they can send them home. So it's something that is just ongoing, and it's completely devastating, which is why, you hear Orange Shirt Day. That is so vital for survivors to be able to speak about their experiences and to say that I'm still here.
Desiree, what's your perspective on the Indian boarding schools and the institutions of cultural genocide that they were, and how they fostered really generational trauma for so many Indigenous families for sustained periods of time?
Well, so Johnny really said everything that I would possibly say, all the way down to it being borderline eerie, to how similar her story is, because mine is my grandpa at a different school, at Carson Indian School in Northern Nevada. He and his brother were taken in the night, separated from the children who went to Prescott Indian School. So I don't know. It's just, I heard so clearly, like, when we talk about systemic impacts onto families, Native families, and how it just ripples through communities, how similar that story was that Johnny just shared about her family, with the cousins popping up, and grandmas and grandpas, that you learn throughout reconnecting with your family as you suture up those wounds. There's a lot to that. And, it's something that we just experienced the exact same thing, where it was like such a disconnect from our family all of a sudden, that instead, so I'm an only child, right? Johnny grew up in a big family. I grew up in a tiny family, wondering where the hell else is the rest of my family? Like, I know it's more than just, so my dad's family, I got my great aunt, because it's like my German and Dutch side. I got my great aunts, I got my great uncles, I got my cousins and stuff. And then on my mom's side, it's like, I got these few people. What's going on with that? And then as I got a little bit older, I started asking my grandpa, Grandpa, what's going on? He wound up telling me about boarding school. So I was 14 years old and, frankly, traumatized hearing these stories about my grandpa, in a terrible place. So he tells me these stories. And then when he passes some years later, not that many years ago, I inherited a book that he wrote about his experiences at boarding school, which was again traumatic, to receive a book from your grandpa about trying to kill himself at 7 years old because they were medically torturing him because he had polio. So I really can't drive home enough, what Johnny said. People think this is a long time ago, but my grandpa died in the 2000s, so it's not really that long ago. And I was disgusted to see the RCMP stand with the Indigenous children. No. That's like when police here want to stand for missing women while their, precincts are maybe involved with the disappearance or covering it up, or who the hell knows, for an oil company, right? So I don't know. I appreciate the visibility when it comes from the community. I don't appreciate the visibility when it's just being co-opted by police to virtue signal. That's just ugly. The whole situation's just ugly.
And that happens a lot in Canada. You see this whole movement for reconciliation. And it's not about reconciliation or making amends to the First Nations of Canada. It's about trying to continue their niceties, that reputation of them being nice, because they're not making any real effort to make amends with the First Nations people. It's just lip service. And, you start seeing that movement kind of trickle down to the US over the last couple of years, where they're like, oh, we need to do reconciliation with the Native people here. But again, it's all lip service. The US has never been able to admit that they have enacted genocidal policies against Indigenous people here, and I doubt they ever will.
Well, speaking of Canada, so many people here are fretting about the outcome of the election. And so many people are saying, if Trump wins again, I'm going to Canada. And it's like, well, y'all don't know how racist Canada is. No one ever told you that Canada is fully imperialist and racist, although a little bit more polite than Americans, but racist nonetheless. And this was borne out to be horribly, tragically true in the story of an Indigenous woman who was receiving medical care in Quebec, in Montreal. And not only did she end up dying, but she was being insulted racially by the medical staff that was there to basically save her life. And this has become a pretty big story in Montreal. I want us to take a look, if we could, at this CBC report about what happened to Joyce. Let's take a look at that.
Joyce Echaquan put up this live video from her hospital bed yesterday. The mother of 7 calls out for help. The distress in her voice is obvious. You can hear other voices too. Hospital staff insulting her. Echaquan died shortly after. It's unclear how. Her family says she had gone to the hospital on Saturday with stomach pains. Her husband says now, like that, her 7 children no longer have a mother. Her death prompted calls of justice for Joyce. At this vigil outside the hospital tonight, demands for change.
This is the unacceptable event that we sadly have had to endure for so many decades.
Sadness, we're mad, we just don't understand why Native women, we have to go through that.
The chief of the Atikamekw Council of Manawan, where Echaquan was from, describes her as radiant. And says the video is audio-visual proof of systemic racism. This comes nearly a year to the day after the release of a Quebec report with 142 calls to action that found Indigenous people in the province face systemic racism when accessing public services.
She was a victim of racism.
Today, the Assembly of First Nations of Quebec and Labrador released its own plan to fight that because it says the government isn't doing enough. The release of their plan today, a sad coincidence, says the Assembly's chief.
It just serves as a reminder that, I guess the mountain is steep, but we have to take it on.
That report was from the CBC. And, Canada clearly has a long history of racism, racist practices, genocidal practices towards the First Nations people there. However, very much like in certain political circles here in the US, there is a big denial of the racist issue in Canada, not none the least coming from the Premier of Quebec. His name is François Legault. He was asked in a press conference about the racism that basically killed Joyce in the hospital while she was supposed to be getting medical care, medical treatment. Instead, she was getting insults and horrific treatment. And he was asked about that. Let's take a listen.
Premier, I would like to hear your reaction to what happened in the hospital in Joliette. And if this is not a case of systemic racism, then what is?
Okay. First, I want to offer my condolences to the family. Second, what happened is totally unacceptable. There will be an inquiry, 2 inquiries, in fact. And the nurses did something unacceptable and she is being fired. And I really don't think that we have this kind of way of dealing with First Nation people in our hospitals in Quebec. Yes, there is some racism in Quebec. We're working on that. Nadine Giraud and Yanel Carman will table some recommendations and will apply those recommendations. So we'll take action to fight against racism.
And that clip courtesy of the Montreal Gazette. Also from the Montreal Gazette, I wanted to take a look, if we could, at the vigil that Joyce's people, the Atikamekw people, held in her honor, and they are fighting justice for Joyce. You know, group, so many of these issues are systemic and overlapping, and the US and Canada just read from each other's playbooks when it came to dealing with First Nations communities. Who wants to jump in on this first? Because I'm sure you guys have hot takes about what happened to Joyce and the ongoing, basically, genocide of Native peoples, specifically Native women. It's 2020, and people are still encountering this in a so-called liberal, open-minded society like Montreal, Quebec. Who wants to get in first? Jen Derewater, let me tag you in.
I can say from my own personal experiences, as someone who's had chronic illnesses since I was a child, this is the norm. It is not an exception. It is the norm, at least within the so-called US. And not to get too far away from the issue of racism, but there's also issues of sexism and ableism in medical care. There's anti-queerness, there's transphobia. Like, there are so many problems in healthcare that, honestly, for me at this point, I just call it the medical industrial complex. To me, it's not a setting for care. It's not a setting to heal wounds. Instead, it creates wounds. You know, for me personally, it's been everything from, you know, microaggressions to more severe things similar to what Joyce experienced. And it's been in parts of the US that claim to be liberal and lefty, like in Boston or here in DC, where I currently live. You know, and at queer medical facilities, because I'm bisexual and two-spirit, so I try to seek out queer healthcare when I can. You know, I've been at the ER on the verge of death from an abusive partner, and had a nurse get real nasty and mean with me when I refused to tell him about my people. And then suddenly no one was coming to take care of me. Like, I literally could have died. And that's what happened. You know, I've been at the Fenway Health Center in Boston, which is a queer health center, have my feet in stirrups, having a doctor, and a doctor of color, no less, you know, like after me about like my last name and telling her about it and what does it mean to be an Indian and blah, blah, blah. You know, here in DC, when I first moved here, I tried to go to the Whitman Walker Health Center, which is another queer health center. I walked in, I saw medical staff covered in the football team slur and logo. You know, I tried to see a therapist, and they act as if I, had like mental illnesses that I don't have because I try to take part in ceremony and things. The George Washington University Hospital has been horrible to me. If there were more pain management doctors and services available, I would no longer go there. I had back surgery there in December 2017, and I feared for my life to the point that I just left the hospital a couple of days early. I had white nurses refusing to follow the doctor's orders and denying me pain medication. I had back surgery, major surgery, and white nurses would not give me my pain meds because you don't need that. You're just a redskin, as they said. I had people working there calling me a redskin. At one point I called in their interim director of patient experience and had an hour-long meeting with this guy. I've just had major surgery. I'm in agonizing pain, and I'm having to educate their staff about how to treat Native people. I ended up leaving the hospital probably a good 2 days early because I just was like, you know what? I'm better off at home by myself than I am here. And since then, I've tried talking with administrative staff at that hospital, at George Washington University Hospital, and it's been pointless. It's constant. It's constant. It never ends. The things that people say and the things that they think are perfectly acceptable to say and do. It's to a point where I avoid ERs as much as I possibly can. Like, I really have to be on the verge of death before I'll go to an ER. I'm afraid to go to doctors, especially as a person with chronic pain. I know I'm white coated. I know I get treated differently than our darker relatives, but my last name's still Deerenwater. A lot of these doctors, I come in there with chronic pain, and one is a woman, they just think I'm crazy or I'm making it up. And then as somebody with the last name Deerenwater, well, I'm just some drag addict, drug seeking junkie Indian, the things that get said and done are deplorable. And that also includes in mental health care settings. I've had so many problems in mental health care over the years, some with racism, some with biphobia, different issues, that it's to the point where I've just given up on mental health care. I'm a person with complex PTSD and a lot of trauma. I need mental health care, but it's not a system that's safe for me. This is the norm for us.
Desiree, I wanted to ask and also kind of make an observation because, what we saw in that CBC report with what happened to Joyce. First of all, the reason it's even a story is because she made a video of the medical violence that she was experiencing while in hospital. And had that video not been released, broadcast, gone viral, her experience and her suffering may not have fully been known. And this is really seemingly the only scale, the only thing that somewhat balances out what is happening to people of color, marginalized communities, Black and Indigenous communities, is the video. If there wasn't video of what happened to George Floyd or Jacob Blake, the police would have made up a story, swept it under the rug, and no one would have been the wiser. And the very same thing with Joyce. 37 years old, mother of 7, and she's gone, partially because the nurses would not take her pleas for assistance and the fact that she was crying out in pain seriously. What is your take about what happens to women, to Native women, to Indigenous women in these medical spaces? It gets erased, and what happened to her also would have been erased if she didn't act as her own advocate and make a video explaining what happened.
Mm-hmm. Those cameras and social media in a way has really actually helped Native communities have at least, I don't want to say a sense of safety, but in a way, at least the things that have been said for so long and under rug swept, invalidated, chalked up to drama or addiction or some, all of the many terrible tropes that get thrown at Native people. It just, I don't know. I feel for this family. I was watching that video and I was really glad to see that the community is rallying. And it just struck me, you know, as you're saying about George Floyd and, I mean, Standing Rock, Olivia Lone Bear, all of these different situations that have occurred that have been highly tragic have been able to get media visibility through these kind of self-advocacy situations. And I know that there are settings on iPhones and Androids that you can set up, which I encourage people to do. Like my iPhone, if I push the thing 5 times in a row, it's going to call my support system and say, I'm interacting with the police right now, and it starts recording on both sides of my camera. And then if the thing dies, it sends to your family. Those kinds of things help your family get justice if something happens. Like, there is safety and visibility sometimes. And so what we're seeing happen is technology is providing a way for there to be credence given to complaints that have been so just intentionally ignored, intentionally shut down. You know, it's a good thing, I think, albeit tragic that it's occurred this way.
Mm-hmm. And Johnny J, I mean, I know that you know how much racism is baked into the medical field and how racism, it just permeates, you know, the medical professionals who are supposedly there to help you. But just based off your race, your ethnicity, they have already made assumptions about you, have made assumptions about the level of care that they're going to provide or not provide for you, and determining whether or not you're as sick as you actually say you are. How did Joyce's story resonate with you when you saw it?
You know, it was horrific because it just triggered so many memories of my own treatment, having to seek care. My family has 31 years of combating racism within the medical system for me to be here. You know, and even longer than that, because, you know, my grandparents were both disabled and we had to fight for their care as well. And, you know, for me, I have lupus, and lupus attacks so many of your different systems. For me, it's my kidneys and liver that always get hit the hardest. And I just had blood work done, and they came back and my kidney function was decreased and my liver enzymes were elevated. And already I just got this sinking feeling in my stomach as soon as I saw that, because I just started with a new doctor. And when doctors see decreased kidney function and elevated liver enzymes in Native Americans, the first thing that they think is alcoholic or drug addict. And after that, and once they have that assumption, they stop treating you like a patient. They stop treating you like a human. And I had this sinking feeling, and I was just so sick to my stomach, because I was like, I need care. I need for this to get better. And I've been doing everything that I can, because my health has been on a downward spiral this year. And so many things have happened, and it's like, it's terrifying right now to be chronically ill in a time of COVID anyway. But I just had this sinking feeling, and I was just like, you know, this is not good. Because I already know the misconceptions that she's going to have, despite the fact that I don't drink, despite the fact that, yeah, she can look at my blood and she can tell that, you know, I'm not doing any drugs. I don't have anything in my system that, you know, I haven't disclosed and that I shouldn't have in my system. But yet that's always their first thought. When you go into the medical system as an Indigenous person, especially the mental health care, they treat like your indigeneity is the thing that is the problem. Like, that's the sickness that you have to overcome. Every single time that becomes the issue. And it's so frustrating. And, you know, I just seeing that video, it made me terrified, because here in LA, they're not letting anyone go into the ER with you. And I'm used to having somebody with me, because if I can't advocate for myself, I need somebody else there to do it. And with COVID, there's so much ableism going on with them not wanting to give care to people that they think won't survive. There's also, you know, the fact that I'm an Indigenous woman, that my life is already undervalued. So when I have to go into the emergency room, I'm terrified because I don't know if I'm going to get the care I need. And I also don't know if I'm going to make it out of there alive. And that's a scary reality because I know that, my chances of survival are high, regardless, because I'm just a fighter. And I have survived so much up to this point that it makes me so terrified to think that I could go into the hospital and if I have COVID or, there's another medical issue that they could say, well, she's got lupus and, chances of survival, well, they're not there, despite the fact that, I've lived with lupus for 31 years now, and I have had a lot of close calls, but I'm still here and I'm still fighting. And it scares me to death to know that my life is out of my hands at that point. And especially when that racism is so rampant. When I saw her video and you listen to them talk, we saw a couple of things that they said that were horrific, but there were more. They were telling her, how do you think your children would feel seeing you like this? They were telling her that the only thing that she was good for was sex, which that kind of boggled my mind because how would that even come up in this situation? But there was just so much going on that just really triggered so much to me. And it made me so mad because nothing is being done. Especially now with COVID, you see Natives and Black people dying at exponentially higher rates than other populations. And a lot of that is due to the racism within the medical system. They are intentionally being denied care, being denied access, and being denied the resources that they need to take care of their health. That's just the reality. And seeing this video, I'm so glad she got it on video because, I think a lot of Natives, when we go into the hospital, we record, we take video. And just in case, just last year at the beginning, I woke up paralyzed from the neck down and I had to be taken by ambulance and they were telling us they were taking me to Cedars-Sinai. And from everything that I knew about Cedars-Sinai, it's one of the best of the best. And I was so relieved because I was scared. I was paralyzed. And when I heard they were taking me to Cedars-Sinai, I was so relieved because I thought, you know what? I'm going to get the best healthcare here. I'm going to get the help that I need. They're going to figure this out for me. But that's not what happened because once they got me to the hospital, I was left on a gurney in a hallway. And then they took me into a room after probably about 15 minutes of just sitting in this cold hallway with nobody there. It was just like from the ambulance entrance, just this little short hallway. They just left me there. And then 15 minutes later, somebody came and got me. They moved me into a room and nobody talked to me. Nobody asked me why I was there. All of a sudden, they're just cutting my clothes off. They're sticking wires on me. They stuck an IV in me. And I was telling the nurse that I don't take pain medication. And I told her that specifically because I don't take pain medication because the minute that you do, even if you need it, they stop treating you like a patient. They stop listening. So I told them not to give it to me. And that was the first thing that she did was give me morphine. And they pumped me full of drugs. Nobody even knew why I was there because nobody was talking to me. Nobody was asking what the problem was. And they got done putting all the wires on me and they left me there. I had my clothes cut off and they just left me there uncovered. I was there for like 20 minutes like that until another nurse happened to walk by and see me and was like, oh, do you need a blanket? And she just came and put a blanket on me. And it wasn't until my partner got there that people started talking and asking questions. And we were just so frustrated because when the doctor finally came in, he started lecturing us about not having health care. And that was his main concern, was the fact that we didn't have health care. So his thing was not the fact that I was paralyzed. It was just that we didn't have health care. The whole time we were there, every time he came in, that was his whole concern. And, whatever they gave me, it started to work. I started being able to move little by little, but we didn't know what caused it. And they were so rude to me in terms of how they were treating me. Like they wanted a urine sample. I could barely walk once I regained function. Like I was so weak and they didn't even offer a wheelchair or anything. They were just like, well, if you don't pee, we're going to have to put in a catheter. Like it was a threat. And it was so horrific because, I kind of hobbled to the bathroom. I got them their sample. I got back in the room and I started getting sick. I started getting nauseated. And, my partner went to go get somebody and they were like, okay, we'll have somebody come in. We'll see if the doctor, what he can give her. The doctor came in and they discharged me. They were like, well, you're stable, which meant I was walking. So they discharged me, and he gave me a prescription for some anti-nausea meds, and that was it. And we were like, well, what happened? How do we prevent this from happening again? And he was just like, well, if it happens again, come back in. And he just sat there for probably about 10 minutes lecturing us again about not having healthcare and eating pistachios. And we left the hospital, and I was pretty much out for the next couple of days. And we ended up having to go to another ER. And they told me at Cedars-Sinai that my blood work was good, that everything was fine. But once we got to the other emergency room, you know, they took one look at the tests that we had from Cedars-Sinai, and they were like, why weren't you admitted? And the doctor that I had, you know, he actually called over there and he chewed them out because I could have died. I was diagnosed with GBS. And, you know, if you don't start treating that right away, you could die. Or I could have been permanently paralyzed. Like, that's the reality of having GBS. And there's so many other things that just come with that the risk, especially because I have lupus. Like, that just aggravates it. So, you know, it was a lot. And if I hadn't got the care that I needed at this other hospital, if I didn't have those tests, I'm pretty sure I would have been treated the same way that I was at Cedars. But, you know, it's so prevalent. And there's so many natives who just die so unnecessarily from illnesses that are easily treated or managed just because of the medical racism within the systems that we have to go to. Like, we have to depend on these. And it's just so horrific. I don't even know. Like, it's so traumatizing just to be a native in the U.S. as it is. But, you know, to be a native who needs medical care or is chronically ill, disabled, who is queer even, you know, it's just a lot. It's overwhelming. Like, I don't even know how we handle things the way as well as we do, like how we still stand as strong as we do, because it's just punch after punch after punch. And there's no end in sight for any of it.
No, I mean, medical racism is medical violence. And on top of that, it's a mind fuck, right? Like, you show up to a place that is supposed to heal you, supposed to treat you. And yet, you know, when you are getting the ass end of some treatment, right? Like, you know, when things aren't right. And you know why sometimes things aren't right, because you are a brown woman, a Black woman. Like, and in America, well, North America, for all intents and purposes, I mean, usually that is enough. I mean, I have not experienced, Jen and Johnny, what you guys have, not even close. I did have an experience with my mom in the hospital where they almost put me out of the hospital because they were slow walking her pain medication. And I told them, I said, if she was a white woman, she wouldn't be in here doubled over in pain. Next thing you know, they call security and it's a problem. But I appreciate you both, all three of you actually, you know, being very honest and vulnerable and sharing your stories, because these things are systemic. What happened to Joyce in Montreal was not a one-off. This happens to Indigenous women every single day across North America. So that's definitely, everybody keep that on your radar. Before we get out of here, guys, I wanted to share with you a quick video. The Indian Collective is starting a new campaign. It's called the Land Back Campaign. And it was inspired from the events of July 3rd of this year, when Donald Trump visited Mount Rushmore, and the land defenders of the Black Hills came to let the president know that, number one, he was on stolen land. Number two, the United States was still in violation of many treaties regarding the land of the Black Hills and Mount Rushmore, and that they want this land back. So the Land Back campaign is going to launch in earnest on Indigenous Peoples Day on the 12th of October. But they have released a short film sort of encapsulating the events that happened the weekend of July 4th in the Black Hills. I wanted to take a quick look at it. I hope I'm pronouncing the word right. It's Hesapa. Let's take a look at that, Dwayne.
To our relatives of Bennington County, do you hear us inside of there? Our relatives inside of Bennington County, we wanted to remind you that you're not forgotten, that we love you, that we remember you, that we know that you're in there as a result of an unjust system. And us, we came together, your relative, to stand with you as we stand against the President of the United States as we fight for our land. And we remember you, and we'll make prayers for you. So we're here to stand with everybody throughout this nation to call out white supremacy, to call out an end to systematic racism and oppression of our communities and our people. Tomorrow, the President of the United States will be coming to the heart of the Asheti Shakoi, and he's not welcome here. And we're here to send a message that we want Mount Rushmore closed and the return of that land back to indigenous people. So we're here in solidarity and remembering that all throughout the system of injustice and white supremacy, you'll find indigenous people. And we also want to remind that as we do this work, we're standing in solidarity with our black brothers and sisters against this racist system of oppression. We have fought hard and long time to protect our land, and will not continue to stand for our land to be stolen from us.
Go to the Indian Collective YouTube channel and check out the extended version of this clip of Hassapa. Gang, I wanted to ask, and really quick, because we're already here, we're at 6:15, and it's Friday. We all know we have, Friday things to do, right?
Yeah.
But I wanted to get your take on this, because this land back campaign is basically, and I'm quoting here from the Indian Collective, it's a multifaceted campaign to empower indigenous communities to get their land back. A very basic yet complex premise given the times that we're in right now. But what they're doing, they're encouraging people to, number one, go and watch the full video on YouTube, also sign a petition, and they are empowering other indigenous communities with tools as part of this campaign for getting the land back. Jen, let me start with you. What is your, I mean, it's a silly question to ask what your take is. I know you support Indians getting the land back, but for this to be a concerted campaign, what are your thoughts about what the land back movement looks like in the 21st century?
I'm so excited, and I feel like just in a lot of ways as Native people, I feel like we've just been erased for so long. I feel like Standing Rock was kind of that modern moment where the rest of the world went, oh, hey, there are still Natives. And I feel like we've been able to keep building on that momentum. And I think also things like the Land Back campaign are partially a result of Black Lives Matters and Mahente and other movements by other folks of color fighting for their rights. We Natives, for very obvious reasons, we're a real small population. I don't think we would have some of the wins that we've had if it weren't for Black and Brown folks also fighting for themselves and their communities. And I think that because we're now having these really large conversations around racism, we're also able to engage in large conversations around colonialism and how our lands have been taken from us, and how it's not enough to just say, oh, we're so sorry what we did to you, but you owe us our land. Like, that's what you owe us. And for me, as a citizen of Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, I want not only the land that we were promised within what was then known as Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, but I want our ancestral lands back. Like, a good chunk of the Southeast was my people's land, and we have almost no sovereignty over those lands. Like, there's a very teeny tiny portion where the Eastern Band Cherokee are, but otherwise our lands, we have no rights to, I mean, I'm doing a lot of coverage and work around the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which happens to pass through parts of our ancestral lands. And, as they're finding remains of people while they're doing the pipeline construction, like, if those remains turn out to be Native, if they turn out to be Cherokee, we basically have no right to them. Like, that's our people. And we can't even have our people to bring them home and really lay them to rest, like, we can't really practice our spiritualities freely if we don't have our lands, because for us, it's not going to a church or a synagogue or such. It's being with the land, like, everything about our land is who we are. There is no disconnection there. And so, fuck yeah, land back. Like,
Desiree.
Right? I don't know. I'm so encouraged when I see anything that has to do with land back, because it's true that land is power. And when you have a generation of Native folks who have been erased, disenfranchised, just struggle, and you have that just for generations and generations, like the ways and the paths towards healing involve direct communication and contact with the land. And I feel like people will understand this, maybe not. When you get near your home territory of your people as a Native person, you can feel it. You can feel it in your deep RNA, where historic trauma and historic celebration exist, right? So I really appreciate some of the work that I see organizations doing along the lines of land back, because there had been a cacophony of Native people for hundreds of years just being like, land back, land back, land back. We need fucking land back. There's no clearer way to say it. We just need our land back. And so, yeah, I watched that video and I'm stoked to see that, there is community support to do that. I think that it's very powerful that they're doing that work in that area, because what they're fighting for is the Black Hills. They're fighting against mining companies. They're fighting for clean water because the Oglala Aquifer is right there, and the mining would poison the same water that the Standing Rock water protectors were protecting. So some of the same community and people. I feel like it's a really positive direction to organize within, because it will teach young people to be outside of the systems that indoctrinate them into, basically non-consensual assimilation out of the need for safety and to feed yourself and things like that. So I was watching it kind of the same as Jen, just being like, hell yeah, land back.
Johnny J, your thoughts, your take.
Oh, I'm always excited when we talk about land back. And there's so much that goes into it. Like Desiree was saying, when you get close to your ancestral homelands, you feel it. And even when you're visiting other lands, there are spirits in that land that, you always kind of honor the spirits there. Like whenever I go somewhere new, I always lay down tobacco as soon as I cross the border and thank the spirits for allowing me to be a guest on those lands, because the spirits of our ancestors and the spirits of the land are still there, and you feel it. Where I feel it the most, though, is like I've gone down to Alabama, Mississippi, and out east a couple of times, and there's such a different feeling that I get. It's almost like home in places that I've never been before, and you feel that power in just the whole atmosphere around you. It's just like a feeling of home, like you're where you were meant to be. And even going to other lands, every time I go up to South Dakota, there is such power in the land that, you just feel it. It just resonates within you, and you're on Indian land. And so I'm always excited, but it also goes back to healing and giving us some closure as well. We've been talking about the Indian residential boarding schools in Rapid City. They just discovered that there were some deed violations in regards to the Rapid City Indian boarding school and the land that it resided on. And this came up out of research because there was a group of people who were looking for a mass cemetery because they were hoping to reunite the children that had been buried there back with their families. And so they were looking for this, for these cemeteries. But in doing so, they found there was some really shady stuff going on in the land dealing. And it turned out that, yes, that land was acquired illegally. And so the Rapid City and the Lakota Sioux were over there trying to figure out, okay, well, what do we do? How do we get this back? And right now, that land is back in federal trust. It's given back to the tribes. It's for 3 area tribes, actually, that are going to have ownership of this land. And next month, I think they're going to be doing like a groundbreaking ceremony because they do want to build like a cultural center. And they did find the cemetery that they were looking for. You know, that was the original goal, and it wasn't something that was forgotten. And it's almost like bittersweet, right? Because you're getting your land back, but at the same time, you did find these mass graves that, you know, you were just almost hoping that they were just rumors, but at the same time, hoping that you would find them so that you could give closure to so many different families. And you know, they found this grave, and they've been able to identify, I think, over 50 students who died there, and they've been able to return them home to their tribal communities so that they can be buried there. And, you know, land back is just so vital. And I know a lot of people think that giving Native land back means that we're asking them to leave, that we're going to kick everybody out. And that's not the reality of it, because we understand that, you know, there are so many people here now, so many different people that do call these lands home. And so it's going to be more about Natives being more in control of that land and having more say in how it is handled, how it is cared for. And it's not going to be about kicking people out or pushing them off. It's just going to be about returning those natural rights back to Native people and allowing us to have more autonomy in how that land is treated. And it's more for conservation as well, because you look at how our lands, our water has just been destroyed by the extractive industries here in the US, and it continues to do so. You have huge cities like Flint that don't have water, that don't have clean water. You have Native communities that don't have water. You have health issues that come from pollution and these extractive industries. You know, there are Native communities that have really huge rates of cancer because of uranium drilling or extractive industries polluting the water and the land. So it's about allowing Natives to take that land back and letting us heal it. And we need that now, because you look at the wildfires, you look at the pollution, you look at everything going on, and we're going in the wrong direction here. The more land that is taken, the worse it gets. So giving Natives their land back, you know, it's vital for our future, because this is the only way that we're going to be able to save the world, especially in light of the climate change that is going on.
Listen, I encourage everybody to do a little bit more research about the Land Back campaign. The Indian Collective is launching it, or this latest iteration of it, on Indigenous Peoples Day. So definitely get more information about that. Guys, we are out of time for today's First Nation Friday. I'd like to thank our collection of Native voices joining us today, as usual: Jen Deerenwater, Desiree Kane, and Johnny J. Follow all of them on Twitter. They are excellent Twitter follows. Johnny J is never off Twitter. Apparently, I have discovered this. She's on Twitter in the morning, in the evening, and maybe even in the afternoon. So definitely,
let's just I'm Twitter. I'm the Matrix, actually. I'm everywhere.
Yes. So again, thank you all for watching. Thanks everyone that was watching today, and in the comments and in the chat. We certainly appreciate you. Don't forget, we are in the middle of our fundraising drive. So if you have just a couple of extra dollars, we know times are tough, things are tight, but you're not going to get a First Nation Friday really anywhere else. So listen, go to therealnews.com/donate. Anything you can give us, we certainly appreciate it. And thank you very much for watching. I'm Kim Brown. We'll see y'all next week here on Stir Crazy. Everyone have a great weekend. Please be safe from COVID. And that's that. Y'all have a good one, okay? See you later. Bye.